Dobry den, good morning, good afternoon, excuse me, morning here. And I hope all of you are doing well in these sometimes difficult times. Today I was invited to give you some ideas about how to think about what you will do in class now that so many of us have recorded videos of our class content from when we were teaching remotely. So I'm going to, I guess, first give you the idea that I think this is a good thing that we have these recordings and that gives us some freedom for class time. I'll give you an example of what I do in one of my classes, and then we'll talk specifically about the videos themselves, how to get students to watch the videos, because sometimes if the students, now that they're back in class, they won't feel motivated to watch the videos that you put so much time and effort into to prepare in the first place. So we can begin with the great pedagogy scholar and scholar in general, Komensky, that I don't know, maybe you know this quote in another language, in the original Czech or Latin, but he encouraged all of us to think about, basically, instead of just speaking to our students about our content, having them practice it, that thinking about what you want students to be able to do, and then giving them the chance to practice it. And often the way that we think about this is that we spend our time in class telling students about our content, and then we send them off to practice it by themselves. And that can be okay, but we now know from a lot of research that there is a lot of benefit to having students practice with us and with each other. And the first little section of today, I'll talk about that a little bit. Often we don't want to give students practice in class, not because we object to it, but because we're very concerned that if we stop talking and allow students to practice a skill or work some problems, that we won't have enough time for all of the content that we need to talk about, to cover in the semester time or whatever time we have for that particular class. And I think we all, whatever we teach, we think our own content is unique in how much there is to talk about and how important it is. And of course, it is important. So this is a real concern. So when we think about if our goal is to have students have good conceptual understanding of our topic, whatever it is, what is the best way to do that? And this is something I'd like you to look at for a few minutes, and then I'm gonna turn on my chat box here. Don't write anything in the chat box yet, but decide which of these are most literature supported, the research supports for students having conceptual understanding. And then in a minute, I'll ask you to put the numbers in the chat box, but don't do it yet because I want to do it all at the same time. Okay, so decide which three numbers you think correspond to the most conceptual learning. Then I will say ready, set, go. And when I say go, so you can enter the numbers, but don't hit enter yet or return on your, whatever it's called on your keyboard. And then when I say go, you can hit return and we'll see all your responses. Okay, so ready, set, go. So we have most of the same groups of answers there. By the way, if you do have to, if COVID makes us teach online again, this ready, set, go method is a great way to get all the students responding online. I used it a lot last year there. Okay, so you chose trying to solve the problem, attempting to teach the concept. That's probably the most well-supported one. We all know from preparing classes how much we learn when doing that, and then discussing an application of the concept with the other students. Now, you are advanced students, so of teaching, so you, of course, chose correctly. And the thing that's, I think, most interesting to think about ourselves and to emphasize when we are trying to convert other teachers to our way of thinking is that the ways that we know are more effective, so the ways that are on the left side of the screen here, are the ones where students are speaking to each other, or at least speaking perhaps to us and perhaps to each other. And often working together, at least temporarily or briefly, and sometimes extensively in smaller groups. So we want students to have this opportunity to be able to talk about our content in class. But we also know that if students just come to class and they don't know anything about what we're going to talk about, and we ask them to talk about it with each other, then they're not going to get very far because they don't know anything. They don't have any knowledge to base their discussion of the content on. So if our professor here says, well, there's no point in having students discuss it because they're ignorant and they don't know anything about it. I'm the one who needs to talk because I'm the one who knows about it. Then we can say, all right, so we do need the students to be prepared for their discussion. And in fact, what they need is the vocabulary to talk about it, some basic facts about the system that they're talking about, and then they'll be able to have these discussions in class. So how can they get those facts? So this is my second and I think only other question for you today. So think about which of these, and there could be more than one. You may think more than one is correct. So decide which ones you think are correct. And then once more in a moment, we'll do the ready, set, go activity. Okay, so again, decide which of these you think are correct, whether it's one or more than one. When I say go, you can hit return. So you can type the letters into the chat box and then hit return when I say go. Ready, set, go. Okay. So lots of D's, it looks like, and then some others were mentioned, except A was not voted. Indeed, A is a terrible idea if there's no background information. Sometimes students have more knowledge than you know about from their life or other classes, other educational experiences. But often A is useless if the students don't have any background in that. We know that if students are able to do, so a lot of people chose D, this will work if the students get feedback on their performance. So if you just ask them a quiz and they don't find out whether they were right or wrong, that won't work. But otherwise it will. I think there's really evidence for B through E. So those folks who picked multiple answers here, we know that students can get facts from textbooks. And I think from our perspective today, we know that students can get factual information from a video, especially if they know what the purpose of watching the video is, what information they're trying to get out of it. So many of us have these videos now. So this really allows us to do something that many of us have been trying to get teachers to do for some time now, which is to have students learn the facts outside of class, right? Now that we have these recorded videos, and then in class, be able to have these experiences where they speak to each other about that content. So like many of you, I have many videos, some of which are public on YouTube and some of which are just for my students. Having students watch them, especially when they know what they're supposed to get out of the video, what I want them to learn from the video, allows them to have that preparation that then they can use to apply the information in class. So how can we organize this? I think you have to start from some list of objectives. So ideally, you have to start and say, what is it that I want students to be able to do? So not just to know, because it's hard to assess whether someone knows something, but what do we want them to be able to do? And knowing that, what do I want to have them do before class and what do I want them to have to do in class? This is just like reminiscing, I guess. This is a photo from when I was there. I think this is the physiology of obesity class, spring 2017. You can see Zbigniew in the upper right there pointing at the screen, who was visiting that class then, as well as probably all these students are no longer, they're all off, graduated and so on there. So when we think about this organization, I think a lot of people, and this is how I was several years ago too, is say, well, I see what you mean, like I understand the idea, but what exactly would I actually do in class? What are things that would actually be a productive use of time if students had watched the video? And we'll also talk about making sure that the students watch the video. So I think if you think about the organization, then you end up with a list like this. And I know that Zbigniew and others have also discussed, and maybe you've discussed with them, this idea of having these lists of goals. And what's nice about these lists is that they're very clarifying. They allow us to think clearly about what it is we want to accomplish, and specifically what we want students to be able to accomplish in our class. I strongly advocate sharing this list with the students so that you can work together to have them achieve it. But even if you decide just to make it for yourself, it provides the clarity that you need, I think, to organize the class. So this, I just want to give you an example of what I do in class for one topic, and then you can, I think, adapt it pretty easily to your content. So for this particular set of goals, I have some of these that I want students to learn before class from watching the videos or reading the book. I tell them exactly what I want them to read and watch before they come. And then I have some of them that I want them to learn basically in class, because it's too difficult to learn it on their own, or at least for some students it will be not very successful to do that. So basically we want to work from simple to complex. So we start with basic vocabulary and things like that. So I have, factual information that the students can easily learn outside of class. I ask them to learn these things outside of class. This isn't the complete list for this topic because I wanted to fit it on one slide, but you can see that some of the words are in italics, and those are the ones that my students know. They have to know them completely before they ever come to class, before we've ever talked about this in class. So they know they need to know those. They come to class, and I think it's useful for two reasons. to check understanding of those facts before you continue. One reason is to motivate the students to actually do the reading or watch the video. If you just repeat the facts in class, then the students won't watch the video. And then you have to waste class time explaining the parts of the heart or whatever you wanted to discuss. And then the second reason is it allows any misunderstandings to be corrected in a very short period of time. There's lots of ways that you could do this. The way that I do it is that the students come and they take an individual quiz. I have some right here from a class from one I gave yesterday. So the students take it as just a paper quiz, and then they take it again, and that's what this sheet shows on the right. I've got some of those too, some real ones. I think maybe I left some there too when I was there, but these are these scratch-off forms that the right answer is hidden under here. I don't know if lottery tickets in the Czech Republic are like this, but in the US, this is like a lottery ticket where you guess the number and you scratch it off and try to win money. And so here you scratch it off and try to find the right answer. And my students do this with their small group or team after they take the quiz by themselves. So there's a couple things that happen here. One is that students prepare because they know there's going to be a quiz. Second, they prepare for class because they don't want to be embarrassed in front of their team members. And third, even if they did not prepare, they find out when doing the scratch-off form what all of the answers are. So they at least finally are prepared at the end of that time period. And usually that motivates them to prepare for the future ones. So they have that basic information, and then they come to class. So you can do this quiz thing outside of class or in class. I do it in class so I can use the scratch-off form, but you can do it online if you prefer to do that. Okay, so then in class, we want to work through what our goals are, basically from simple to complex. So you take, again, my first thing I would ask them would still be vocabulary, but I'm going to put it in a context. So this is the question I asked my students about 2 weeks ago. They come to class, I say, okay, he's had a heart attack. This is his ejection fraction. What are these other numbers? So this is still just vocabulary, really, but it allows the students to put that vocabulary into a little context and to practice using it in a situation that feels more real to them, even though, of course, I made this up. Having an application makes it more interesting for them. So now they've gotten used to the vocabulary, and we can go a little deeper into the system. So now I'm going to address this goal about heart valves. Again, if you put that goal in a context, it makes it more interesting for the students, and also allows them to start thinking about applying the information rather than just memorizing it. This is not a question for you. It's just an example of a question I give my students, that if you had an incompetent bicuspid valve, what would happen? And the students discuss it. There's actually more than one right answer here. And then they vote, and I go around the room with my microphone and they explain their reasoning until we make some progress here. So we just gradually become more complex. And then the last thing that I would do would be these sort of open-ended goals, applying the understanding, in this case, of the whole system to a particular made up, but still applied clinical situation. So in this case, you can see there aren't any choices. I want the students to think about it and decide what they think is the reasoning that supports the symptom, and then defend that in class. And then they vote and they argue and they defend that as they go through class. So they've gradually worked from the simple to the more complex applications as we go through. So the nice thing about this is that you can actually, or one nice thing, you can give students, because it's just practice, you can give them harder questions than maybe you would even ask them on an exam. certainly harder than more complex or messy questions that don't necessarily have a simple right answer, things that are more real life, because these are practice. So it's fine if there's no completely clear right answer, much like real life. There might be more than one way to look at it, and so on. And I think that's the power that it gives, is it allows us to show students this is a complex situation, and this is something that you're not going to get easy answers to all of these things. I'm sorry, I'm just now seeing Zbigniew's question in the chat box. Yes, actually there are now 3 online tools that replicate the immediate feedback assessment technique, which is the scratch-off cards. There's 3 different tools that allow us to do that online. Easy, some of them are better than others, but if I can send an email afterwards to the organizers here, maybe they can include that information with the link to the video when that goes out. But at any rate, Zbigniew, I can send certainly to you that information as well. Okay, so we know that we can do lots of things in class that apply to our particular case, right? So if what I just said doesn't make any sense for your own class, would not work for your own class, just think of what is the real life application of whatever your content is. So it doesn't have to be in the form of these clinical situations. If you're not teaching a clinical course, something with clinical applications, it could be something that sort of happens to people in real life, like, okay, you're hyperventilating, we're going to give you this paper bag to breathe into. Why is that? So that's something that can apply, I think, to any field. If you do have a field that where stories can be used to tell about the context of your topic, then there are many case studies available in many different fields. You can write your own. There are online sets of them. And what's nice about these is, again, they often provide context, complexity, ambiguity. So just more of the real life feeling. And they can be simple or difficult depending upon the level of your students. Sometimes at the beginning of the semester, you might do a more simple one and then go on to more complex ones as things go on. Students love to have these little competitions. And it's something that we know from the research literature provides a surprising amount of motivation to many different students to sort of have a little competition. So this is an example from my class where there's this set of rats that receive these different hormones, and the students have to figure out which rat got which hormone, which requires a pretty sophisticated understanding of feedback loops within the endocrine system. But also there's a little tension because the first team to get it right wins a little prize. So students often come back after, a year or two later and tell me that they remember this the rat competition. So I'm always surprised, but I think that there's just this element of making something into a game that if you can do it, students tend to remember it and hopefully remember the material as well. The other thing that I think, at least on our side of the Atlantic, what you often hear people saying is, I wish I had time to discuss primary research papers with my students, but I don't. But you do. You do if you have much of the knowledge acquisition occurring outside of class through videos or other methods, but especially videos now that we all have them. So often in my animal physiology class in the spring, these are some of the papers that we read in that class and discuss in depth in class. I think students having a real understanding of how these papers are created and how to read them and understand them and criticize them is really important, at least for what my students will do. And so having that time in class is really important because understanding research papers is a difficult skill. It's not something that students can easily do, young students, without our assistance. So it's a great thing to spend some class time doing as well. For me, if I would do a primary paper, I would tell the students to read the paper outside of class, and I would ask them a few things about it. But I wouldn't expect full understanding until after we had discussed that in class. Okay, so what our professor could say to that is, well, sure that you can do all of these things, but what is none of it is going to work if the students don't watch those videos, right? If they don't have that information coming into class. So I think the most important thing here, if you remember one thing from today's workshop, I would say it's don't lecture about what's on the video. So this is the biggest mistake I think that we make. And even before videos existed, we would do this on the reading. We would say, oh, the students didn't do the reading. I'll tell them everything that was in the reading. And then of course the students say, oh, she's going to tell me everything that was in the reading. So no need for me to do the reading because in class, she just says everything that was in the reading. So if we really want them to do the reading, it's critical that you apply what was in the reading in class and do not repeat it. I don't know if you guys have at the end of the semester, you have the students write comments about your class and give you ratings and things like that. But I had a comment about 2 years ago at the end of this class I'm teaching now, human physiology, where a student said, and I think they intended it as a criticism, this class is going to class is completely useless if you haven't prepared for class. And he meant it as or he or she meant it as a criticism, but I was like, yes, this is exactly my goal. That class is only useful if you've prepared. And so you have that motivation to do that. If we explain the reading, of course, any smart student won't do the reading if it's a waste of their time to do that. Okay, so we can't repeat what's on the video, but how can we make them watch the video? First of all, trust the video. You said it well in the video. Have them watch it. Don't lecture on that content. Okay, step one. Step two, it is very useful to give the students a way to think about that video or reading by structuring some questions about it. You could do a quiz. You could just say, watch the video, here's a quiz. I think that only works well if you tell them what you want them to get out of the video. Otherwise, they're not sure what's the most important thing. For us as experts, we know what the most important thing is. We know what the organization is. We have that expert blind spot. But for students, it all seems the same level of importance. And so I think for us to tell them, this is what I want you to get out of the video, and then give them a quiz, that can be useful. I prefer even not to make it be a quiz or something. It's only you watch the video and then you have just like a piece of paper. Well, it's electronic, but a set of questions that they can fill out while they're watching the video. So they already know what the questions are that they're going to ask. You can ask them factual things, of course, what happens to blood pressure if cardiac output goes up and things like that. That's useful. But I find that it's especially useful to include some more affective questions, like which part of the video was confusing, or how well do you think you understand this part, or do you, if you know someone in your life with diabetes, because most of my students have family members with diabetes, more than 10% of Americans are diabetic. Does this accord with their experience, or something like that, where it connects to their own understanding or life. And then if you have the students do this ahead of class, so for my students, it's due. So this morning in an hour and a half, I've got my physiology class, and the students have their homework due this morning from watching the videos and doing the reading. It's due this morning. And so I can look at it, well, maybe today I'll be talking with you, but often I can look at it before class and say, oh, okay, well, they understand this part, but they don't understand this part. Now, maybe over the years, you know what's hard for students and you don't have to do that every time. But often you can look through, especially if it's something you haven't taught many, many times, and say, okay, I can see immediately that the students had some difficulty with this and not with this other part. So in that case, you might end up actually lecturing a little bit on something that was in the video, but now the students are prepared to hear it because they watched it, they tried to understand it, they struggled with it, and now they're sort of a prepared audience to hear what you have to say about it before you go on to the other activities. Okay, so don't repeat what was on the video. Try to motivate them to watch the video with some kind of assignment, especially if it has them think about it and not just memorize the facts from it. Although if all you want them to know is the facts from the video, I think that's fine too. You just decide what's important for you. And then, as we already talked about in class, you want to have students practice applying that. Again, I think this is important, not just for the reasons that we already discussed, but because if the students feel like watching the video has nothing to do with what happens in class, and I hear this from my students about other classes, that they're told to watch a video and then what happens in class is something different. If there's no connection that's made there, even if the connection seems obvious to you, I think you want to make it really clear to your students. Okay, in the video, we talked about this, so now we're going to apply it to this. Make it really clear to the students because it's not as obvious to them as you might think. Finally, I think if you have students work together in class and not individually, you actually get a lot better adherence to watching the videos. Because if you know you can just come into class and, you know, kind of hide and not really say anything or do anything, and then your motivation to prepare for class is lower because the punishment that you have essentially from not preparing is low. But if you get together with a group and they're talking about the content and what was in the video and they're applying it and you can't because you didn't prepare, that will motivate you to prepare in the future because you don't want to have that feeling that you weren't able to contribute to the conversation or help your team solve a problem, help them win a competition, or something like that. So I think it's just human nature that we want to participate. We don't want to look stupid in front of other people. And so even if it's just a small group of people, it's something that helps motivate us to do what we know is the best thing for us to do anyway. Okay, so mostly I wanted to be able to answer questions here, and it looks like there are questions. So I don't know if I'm in charge of hand raising and things like that, but please go right ahead.
Yeah, hello. I raised my hand, Anna here. I wanted to ask, how long before the class do you send the students the videos or the questions, the quizzes to prepare? Is it like throughout the semester or just after the class or something like that?
Yeah, I usually tell them that I'll have everything they need to prepare for class at least 1 week ahead of time. So like for today's class, Tuesday, by last Tuesday, they would have known what video to watch, what reading, what I want them to get out of it. And then the questions also, they're basically the homework that they had to do. Those questions were there a week ahead of time. Now in real life, for a class that I've taught many times before, most of the material is there at the beginning of the semester because I already have it. So I make those questions and see you later, Tanya. So I have them prepared more in advance, but very few students will look at them way in advance because they have many other classes and commitments. So usually a week is enough time. All right, other